that migrants are being housed in, the way they're being treated by ICE. The immigration attorney that we have been talking to for years has, of course, been keeping an eye on all of this. She is based in Texas. We welcome back Kate Lincoln Goldfinch to our airwaves. Kate, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Hi, Joan. Thanks for having me on.
So, this is such a huge problem with, now I'm seeing actually mainstream media talking about not just people being taken into custody, but people being disappeared, pulled off into custody, shifted between 3 or 4 different sites in the space of 2 or 3 days, not being able to reach out to their family can't reach out to them, there's no legal representation. Good God, what has happened to us?
Yeah, it's gotten really bad. And I think, they changed tactics post Minneapolis. And now what they're doing is invisible disappearances of people, mostly through partnerships with local law enforcement agencies. So in Texas, where I am, every DPS state trooper is deputized to enforce immigration laws fully. And sheriff's office in every county are required to cooperate on some level with immigration. And so thousands of people are pulled over on pretextual traffic stops. I had a client who got pulled over because he didn't have a light on his license plate. Another one that his license plate was crooked. Tinted windows 2 miles over the speed limit. And this is how people are being disappeared from their families, and their car is just left on the side of the road. And the thing that I keep telling people is we're all driving by these incidents without even realizing it. It's not like, there's no flash grenades. There's no tear gas in the streets. It's invisible and insidious, and people disappear and they go into these black hole detention centers, the majority of which are also here in Texas, and the conditions are terrible. I mean, this is including, family detention is alive and well, and family separation is absolutely occurring. And the thing that I think is so important is that we continue to talk about this stuff and that our outrage stays, because if we let it die down because it's not right before our faces, they're going to get away with it. And this is what Stephen Miller wants. He wants it to be invisible so that they can deport millions of people. They've said it.
Has anything changed since Kristi Noem was shown the door?
Well, I think, it's this business of making it less visible. this is the plan with Mark.
But nothing good has happened since then. We've got no upside here.
I haven't seen any upside. We are, if we need a silver lining or some ray of hope, what I'll share is that in my practice as an immigration lawyer, we're still getting a lot of wins. We're still getting the green cards and the work permits, but most importantly, we are being successful in getting people out of detention through habeas cases. Just two clients this week, both of them fathers with more than 20 years in the United States, both of them pulled over for pretextual traffic stops and taken from their families with young children. Both of them denied release by the immigration court system, and both of them ordered released ultimately by the federal court system through habeas. And in one of the cases, our client had submitted an asylum application, and in the signature box, we wrote detained, which is common practice because you can't obtain a signature when someone's detained. And the judge denied the asylum case for failure to sign it. And the next day, the federal judge ordered him released. So the shenanigans continue within DHS and the immigration system, but the federal courts really are pushing back and people are getting out eventually.
Explain to me and our listeners, what do you mean when you say you bring a habeas case?
So it surprises some people to hear that the immigration court system is the Executive Office for Immigration Review, and it's part of the DOJ. It's part of the executive branch. It's not an Article III judicial branch of the government. So in the way that we have checks and balances between the president and the Congress and the courts, we don't have that in immigration. When an immigrant goes before an immigration judge, both the judge and the prosecutor report to the attorney general. And so the precedential case law and the decisions of the judges and the policies and the behaviors of the prosecutors are all ultimately directed by the president. So needless to say, in an administration like Trump, justice is very hard to find. But the workaround for practitioners and immigrants ultimately has been to take these cases out of immigration court and into federal court. And we file a writ of habeas corpus, which essentially is asking the federal judge to override the decision of the immigration court, because federal court is stronger and more powerful. And they're doing it. I mean, I don't know exactly the percentages, probably close to 90% of these habeas cases that are being taken out of immigration court and into federal court are being successful because the injustice is so bad. The violation of people's due process and constitutional rights, their right to remain silent, their right against search and seizure are being violated so obviously that these federal judges have just had it. And they're just ordering people released over and over and over again. I mean, the Trump administration is losing bigly, as Trump would say, in the federal court system. And so at least we have that,
So is this something you experience a lot from local courts, that they just seem to be on the side of Stephen Miller and don't seem to necessarily care about what happens to these people?
Well, yes, when we have a president like Trump, because the president directs the AG, who puts the DHS secretary in the position and guides the judges, and they create the decisions, precedential case decisions in the court system. So it's like the culture and the attitude within the agency is completely changed by whoever is in charge. So during the first Trump administration, this also happened. The difference, though, that I think maybe a lot of people don't necessarily understand is that during the first Trump administration, number one, this was the first time they had ever done this. And they were really focused on the border and closing down asylum eligibility at the border. And so they did things like the migrant protection protocols, sending people back to Mexico. And they did the zero tolerance policy, and they separated families at the border, and they did Title 42 to close it for COVID. But it was all border focused. Well, on the day one of the second administration, they had the playbook already. They had Project 2025 and they had the playbook for border closure, and they essentially hit one button, issued a flurry of executive orders, and closed the border completely to legal entrants and asylum seekers. And then they turned their focus on the interior. And that's the difference. That's what we're seeing now, are these family separations and disappearances of people living in the interior of this country, who many of whom have been here for decades, most of whom have no criminal history whatsoever, and also many of whom are in some type of legal process, like these people going to courthouse appointments and ICE check-ins, and they were paroled in, or they have TPS, and their status gets revoked and they get yanked. And that is all a new playbook on the interior of the country, of the administration.
And the way I explain that to the listeners, it's like, yes, you're a migrant, but you have come in legally through a program that exists, and you are here in this country legally trying to move forward. And then all of a sudden, with the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump can say, oh, that program? Yeah, that's gone. So the program you have come in under suddenly disappears. And guess what? That legal protection disappears with us. So it's not like all of a sudden there's all these illegal immigrants who are trying to game the system. It's like we are creating illegal immigrants by taking away the programs that they're a part of. It's so absurd.
Well, and it's like this was going to happen in Springfield. I mean, we all remember the debate where Trump claimed that they were eating the pets in Springfield. I mean, he has had his eyes set on the Haitian population in Springfield since the campaign. And right after Minnesota happened, they canceled TPS, which is the protected status that many Haitians have. And they were literally sending Bovino and CBP to Springfield to round up these people who have been here since 2010, who by definition have no criminal history. And they were literally going to send thousands of troops into Springfield to pull these people from their homes in the middle of the night, children and all, in another one of these actions. But the courts stopped it. So this is what they're doing. They are, just like you said, they're taking away legal status and then acting like people are illegal and then going after them.
Kate Lincoln Goldfinch is an immigration attorney. She owns her own firm. She is based in Austin, Texas, where some of the worst problems in our current immigration system have been occurring. Kate, talk to us about health care coverage. I know that's been a big concern.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I just ran for the Texas House. I lost. But one of the things we talked a lot about is healthcare coverage in Texas. And Texas has rejected federal funds for coverage. So we have millions of people uncovered in the state of Texas. And there's just no reason for that. Of course, the belief is that immigrants are receiving medical care and therefore
immigrants are getting all these benefits. They just come over into the country. They get free education. They get free medical care. They get welfare. Oh my gosh. The stories out there are amazing.
It is amazing. And you know what? They do get free public education. They do. And Stephen Miller actually went to leadership in Texas and said, let's have Texas be the ground zero for revocation of public education. They don't want public education. They don't want emergency medical care, which is what people can access. I presume they would have someone who's dying just, die on the street. The thing that people overlook, and I know your listeners all know this, of course, is that the taxes that immigrants do pay are more than any resources that they receive. So they do pay property taxes, whether they rent or own. They do pay sales taxes on everything that they buy. They do pay employment taxes, and many of them pay into the Social Security system without ever withdrawing funds. And many economists have studied this, and the Cato Institute, which is nonpartisan, just did the most comprehensive study on the economic impact from a tax perspective of immigrants. And it's a 30-year study at both the local level, the state level, and the federal level, comparing immigrants get education and they get emergency medical care, true, but they also pay these other taxes. And the net result of that was a $14 trillion benefit to the economy from undocumented immigrants, taking into consideration all of the resources that they might also receive. And so that's the thing that's important. It's like, number one, who is such a monster that they would deny emergency medical care to somebody who's dying or deny public education to a child? Don't you see that hurts everybody? It's not just about that particular child and their own future. But number two, okay, and we still win from having this person here. That's the thing that I think we need to keep hammering, because the humanitarian angle and the care and concern for human beings doesn't move the needle with bigots. But they claim to be, fiscally conservative or interested. And so if that's actually true, well, then let's talk numbers. We can talk numbers.
Yeah. And one of the things that always drives me crazy is this argument. Well, illegal immigrants show up at the hospital and they get care. Okay, let's think about that. There's an undocumented family. Their kid falls off their bike and breaks their arm or breaks a leg or is bleeding from a head injury. You want that family to take that kid to an emergency room and be turned away because they don't have the proper paperwork? And when I talk to people like that, when, something that seems so theoretical, when you make it practical, people see it in a whole different way. Well, I guess. Oh, yeah, you guess. Okay. It just amazes me how people can just embrace a talking point without paying attention to the human story behind it. And now we've got all these people who, who are afraid to report domestic violence for fear that the cops will call ICE, afraid to show up for even required court dates that they are legally responsible to do for the programs they're in, because they walk out and in the hallway, guess who's there? ICE is there. I mean, this country has changed in such a way that it is almost unrecognizable to me. Do you think there will be any difference under Mark Wayne Mullen instead of Kristi Noem, how DHS operates?
It's true. You have those moments, I'm sure we all do, where it's like we're boiled frogs or whatever the analogy is, but you have these moments when you look back and you realize like how far we've fallen in a year, that something that a year ago would have just stopped you in your tracks now feels almost normal. And I, this point about like fearing what used to be safe. We used to just have this basis of safety that you are safe to report domestic violence to the police. I mean, communities of color have always been at risk. And so I think we need to always have that caveat, but like that a domestic violence victim could call the police and get help, or that somebody who has a court hearing could show up at court and seek justice, and that is no longer true. It really isn't true that it is advisable necessarily for a domestic violence victim to call the police anymore. I mean, how awful is that for public safety overall? But, to answer your question, no. I mean, Mark Wayne Mullen is, equally bad. He may not, get on a horse and do a bunch of ads yet, but he's not a good dude. And he's still going to, do Stephen Miller's bidding. And ultimately what Stephen Miller wants is essentially, a whitewashing of this country and a deportation of immigrants. And that they're still after that. And this is why I say we got to keep our eyes on these people. We cannot just see like, oh, nobody's getting shot in the back of the head in the middle of the street for protesting this week, so I guess I'm not going to call my legislators. No. A little girl, a 3-year-old girl, was taken from her mom at the border, put into foster care. They refused to release her to her father, who is a permanent resident. And meanwhile, she was getting sexually abused in foster care. I mean, these things are happening. It is completely unacceptable. And we need to be calling that Capitol switchboard regularly.
I thought it was amazing in Minnesota, where they thought they could fix things by scapegoating Greg Bovino. Oh, yeah, we're going to move him back to California. And, oh, by the way, he's probably going to retire really soon. But then Tom Homan, of all people, the architect of the child separation policy in Trump's first term, Tom Homan was sent to Minnesota as the calming force. I just thought that was staggering.
Yeah, no, we're not buying it. We know better. It's not getting better. It is not getting better. It's getting less visible. That's the truth.
So regular folks, the kind who are listening to this radio station right now, the kind of people who probably are a little bit more politically aware and a little bit more attuned to activism than the average person. I know there's a lot of people out there saying, oh, this problem, Kate, it's so big. It's so overwhelming. I'm just one person, and ICE is big and strong and scary. What can I do? Is there anything we as individuals can do?
The thing we know the regular stuff, right? Like donate to the orgs and the ACLUs and vote and register people to vote and, become active in your party and call the legislators and like all of that. Yes, we know. But the needle is going to move when the regular folk who are not on the, edges start to pay attention. And the regular folk who have checked out intentionally because it's painful for them, like people who have a conscience but are too overwhelmed by the reality of the situation, have taken social media off of their cell phones, they've stopped watching the news, and they are like intentionally unaware. But if they were aware, it would hurt them and they would care. And we all know a handful of those people. And we might judge them, but we know them and we know that they are, decent at their core. And so I think the job of those of us who are, willing and brave enough to continue paying attention and being active and loud is that we're going to the intentionally unaware friends of ours, and we're making them pay attention, and we're making them understand what is going on and do something about it. And if that's tell 5 more people, then fine. Let's do that.
You're absolutely right, because I know people who are good people who have told me, well, back before we had the primary here in Illinois, well, it's all so depressing. Like I'll vote, and maybe a week or two before it's time to vote, I'll look into what's going to be on the ballot and what the issues are and who the people are. But I don't want to pay attention to it on a daily basis. I try to avoid politics because, it's just so negative. It's so stressful. It's so depressing. And I don't know. I know the person who's saying it has a good heart and is the kind of person who would always want to do the right thing. And what do you say to somebody like that? Well, yeah, it's hard and it's depressing, but you really need to pay attention. I don't know. I don't have the words.
You say, I got to tell you about this thing I heard on the radio today. And then I looked it up and it's true. And I need you to know that this is happening. And could you make a phone call to your legislator, or could you tell someone else? Because we have to spread the word and stay aware. They want us unaware. So let's not let that happen.
I know it still would be something that I would wish hadn't happened. But I think what happened with Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minnesota forced a lot of those people who want to stay neutral, who want to keep their head in the sand as long as humanly possible. It was so out there. It was so widespread. People were talking about it so much that I think it forced a lot of those people to face some really uncomfortable truths and some really uncomfortable ideas. And I think it was fear of that caused, the shakeup in DHS. And, we got to find somebody responsible. Okay, let's sacrifice Bovino, who did not go particularly quietly. But I think you're exactly right. I just don't know, short of another Renee Good or Alex Preddy, what it's going to do to keep those people focused on these issues and not say, okay, well, that was really awful and I'll make sure I vote correctly next time. But in the meantime, leave me alone. I don't, it's so easy. It's so easy to just pretend it's not happening. We can all, Rachel Maddow said this months ago, when we were looking at, the fascism taking root in this country. And she said, it's not like, you can still go to the grocery store and you can still go out to the movies and, you may feel like your daily life really isn't affected by this. But by the time you realize it is, it's going to be too late. And I just sort of feel like that's happening with this issue as well.
Well, and it's really overwhelming when we consider all of the people in the country who are checking out politically. But it's less overwhelming when you scan just the favorites in your phone. And if there are 2 people there, commit to calling them and say, hey, I've got this thing on my mind. I respect your decision to not watch the news, but I need you to know that this stuff is happening and we've got to do something together. Can you commit to me to take one action and to call one more person? And create a chain just in your own little world. And if enough of us do that, we keep it alive.
One of the Substackers I follow said that, it doesn't take a huge commitment. You don't want to go out and demonstrate and wave a sign. Okay. Take 5 minutes a week. Have either all the phone numbers printed out or have them on your desktop, your state rep, your state senator, your congressperson, your senators, and maybe even local officials if need be. Spend 5 minutes calling them on a weekly basis to talk about whatever issue is on your mind at that time, and what maybe something in the news, maybe a vote you want your elected official to take or not take, or maybe you've heard about a state law that's pending that you either want them to support or you really want them to oppose. I mean, people are always complaining, oh, Democrats, they're not being passionate enough, they're not fighting hard enough. Well, you know what? They start getting enough calls, and that's going to change. We are the ones that have to light a fire under them. A lot of people are still looking for the big person who's going to show up and save us. Well, as I tell my listeners, you know what? Look in the mirror, because the person that's going to save you is you. And I really do think, Kate, maybe you disagree, but I think 5 minutes a week on the phone would make a huge difference if enough of us did it.
No, I totally agree. And every legislator I've ever talked to has confirmed that the calls matter. And if you're overwhelmed by, what do I say? Who do I call? It's overwhelming. Just there's a website called 5calls.org, the number 5calls.org. And you can tell it to look at your location and literally pick the issue that you care about from a list of current issues. And it gives you a script to read and a phone number to call. It's so easy. You don't even have to use your brain.
It really is. Kate, I thank you so much for joining us. It is always a pleasure to talk with you. And man, oh man, I really appreciate that you're fighting the good fight and that you never quit and never give up. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you, Joan. It's great to talk to you again.